In Chapter 9 of the Lean Startup, Eric Ries makes 3 main points about the importance of building in small batches. Point number 1. Make sure you're focusing on building the right stuff and not building stuff as quickly as possible. This is an extremely important point when it comes to product development, and that is because whatever isn't right for your customer is really just waste because no one's going to use it. So the point of product development is to make sure you're actually building the right stuff, building features that your customers care about. Now, since customers don't really necessarily know what they want, the only way to make sure you are on the right track of building the right stuff is to run many product experiments. Now, before you get to a point where you're actually sure that what you've built resonates with your customers, whatever you've built is potential waste. So in order to minimize that potential waste, what you should be doing is you should be testing out whatever you've built as quickly as possible through A/B testing, which is discussed in Chapter 8. So when it comes to building new features, what you should be doing is releasing in very small batches, iterations that maybe might feature 1 or 2 features that you can then test with your customers to see what their initial reaction is, so that you know if what you're building is going to be potential waste or something that your customers actually want. And with small batching, you can do this effectively. If you're building just 1 or 2 features that you can then test out extremely quickly, you won't really run the risk of going down the path of building even more features based on what you think your customers want. Instead, after testing those 1 or 2 features, you can have a clear signal of whether what you're building is really on the right track. So you don't end up building all these features related to previous features that you haven't even tested with your customers, thinking that doing this will be more efficient. Honestly, though, you can be more efficient by building lots of features at once, but the point is not to build as many features as possible. The point is to build the right stuff. And in order to make sure you're always on the right track, you want to be testing what you're building as rapidly and as frequently as possible with your customers. Again, the goal is not to build stuff quickly, it's to build the right stuff. Point number 2, rapidly iterate through a series of small product experiments. So this point relates to the act of constantly testing what you've built with your customers. And some companies do this very regularly. They do this in what's called continuous deployment, where they continually deploy update after update with their product, usually small updates to inform whether their product development direction is correct. And to do this, what you want to do is you just want to be constantly running these product experiments, which involve testing 1 or 2 small changes to your product with your customers and then examining the feedback that you receive. And this way you can get through the build, measure, learn feedback loop as quickly as possible. Again, it's only a build, measure, learn feedback loop because of the series of steps that are involved in this product experiment testing. But what you really want to do is you want to first decide on what you want to learn, and then you want to decide on how you want to measure that learning before you go out and build something to then measure and then see if you actually get the learning that you want. And to quickly go through this cycle, the best thing you can do is to constantly release new versions of your product, new iterations that showcase 1 or 2 small changes, and then to see what kind of reaction you get from your customers so that you can make better decisions when it comes to deciding on what to build next. And finally, the third point that Eric Ries makes is that the ability to learn faster from your customers is really the essential competitive advantage that a startup wants. As a startup, you want to be, again, building the right stuff. And in order to build the right stuff, you have to quickly learn from your customers. And what better way to quickly learn from your customers than to release as many versions of your product as possible through a series of small-scale iterations where you can then get real-time, accurate feedback from your customers on whatever you've built so that you can further refine your product development direction. The bottom line of chapter 9 is really about how scale isn't that important until you get to a product market fit moment. It's not about churning out as many features as possible and as quickly as possible. Efficiency is really not what you really think it is when it comes to pre-product market fit startups. Efficiency is not what you think it is. Efficiency is not building things with the least amount of resources and time as possible. Efficiency is building the right thing and testing it as quickly as possible so that you can minimize potential wastage. Because whatever you've built, whatever you've prepared for, that you then get the signal of your customers don't actually want, whatever you build, whatever you've prepared for, that then results in features that your customers tell you you don't want, becomes waste. So you don't want to have work in case, just stuff you've built just in case that really doesn't then get used because you then decide to change direction because of the feedback that you've gotten. Don't try to do work that isn't really related to whatever iteration of the product that you're doing. Don't try to do work in advance. Try to work on just testing the iteration that you're currently working on for your product instead of doing all this work only then to get the signal that what you're building actually doesn't resonate with your customers. So that's really it for chapter 9 of the Lean Startup. Operate in small batches, iterate quickly, iterate rapidly, prototype rapidly, constantly test what you've built. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you can do all this work in advance only to then see that your customers don't actually want what you've prepared so much for. So that's it for chapter 9 of the Lean Startup, and I will see you in chapter 10's summary.